Yes, welcome everyone. We are live in a new chapter of No Damn Excuses, or in Spanish, Sin Malditas Excusas. Today, we have an amazing guest. And let me tell you who is our guest today. Martine Kalaw is a passionate advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, with a remarkable life story. As a Black immigrant woman and a former stateless, undocumented person, she has experienced the challenges of exclusion and marginalization firsthand. Despite her disadvantages, she accesses golden opportunities through attending a private school, which shaped her empathy and understanding of diverse perspective. In 2017, Martine founded Martine Kalaw Enterprises LLC, focusing on day discussions, workshops, and program development. Her mission is to bridge the gap between different worlds and make day a safe and inclusive space for everyone. With experience serving Fortune 500 companies and speaking at TEDx events, Martine is a powerful advocate for creating a sense of belonging and advancement for all individuals and organizations. Her journey and expertise make her a driving force in promoting positive change and social justice. Do you have the courage to follow your dreams like Martin, or will you be a dreamer forever? This channel will seek to find the truth through provocative conversation, interviews, and constant search of wisdom so that we can all achieve our dreams, purposes, and no damn excuses. Please let me welcome the one and only Martine Kalaw. How are you, Martin?
Hello, Rodrigo. That was a wonderful introduction. And thank you. You said my name, my last name, better than anyone has in my entire life. So thank you for that.
Amazing. It's so great to have you here on the show. First of all, I want to know, where are you located right now?
I am located right now in Baltimore, Maryland. So right outside of Washington, D.C., and about 3 hours from New York City. I used to live in New York City for 13 years, so I'm still very much a New Yorker in my heart.
Amazing. Love it. It's a great place to live. Um, I'm quite intrigued, Martine, about all of your story. I know that you have an amazing story.
Yeah.
Well, what can you tell us on your own words? Like, who are you? Can you give us a little bit of context to know a little bit about yourself?
Yes. When people ask me who I am, I like to first say that I'm a survivor of I'm a stateless survivor. I'm a survivor of the undocumented immigrant experience in the United States, and anyone who has access to the news knows how trying and political that space can be, but it's also a human space, and it can be very dehumanizing. And so I'm a survivor of that because this is a system that is designed for people like myself to not come out of, to fail. So after a 7-year and very long journey, I was able to come out of that and define myself as the person that I am. So besides that, I am, a business owner. I am an author, a speaker, and really what I do, what I believe in is being a bridge builder. That's really what I am. I like to elevate people and build bridges between communities and people who have access to and have influence and have the power, and those that may feel like they don't have the dignity, they don't have voice, they don't have um agency when they do, but they just don't know how to access it, how to tap into it, or they forget. And so I like to connect these two worlds. And I believe that because of my own experiences and journey, I've lived and toggled between these two worlds my entire life, right? And so my job is to allow those who do have power access to see that those who don't are not a charity case, right? These are not people that need help. They need to be invested in. They have value. And for those who are in that other bucket, to not position themselves as downtrodden and broken, but to have and walk with dignity and remember their source of power. So that's ultimately what I do, whether I do it in a professional manner in corporations or whether I do it in the work, the advocacy work that I do with stateless persons and immigrants in the space of immigration. It's pretty much the same message.
Amazing. So probably one of the questions that I have towards everything that you're telling me right now is, how do you choose those peoples, or how this even function in terms of,
Yeah.
I can imagine that there's a lot of people with difficulties, but how do you select those that you can help the most?
That's a great question. So, the work that I do, and I mentioned I own a boutique company, Martine Kalaw Enterprises, and that is, I do that work in the private sector. I work with organizations and companies, corporations like Fortune 500 companies in commercial real estate, in financial or private equity finance. So, usually, organizations or companies will reach out to me because they're trying to promote what you call day, which is correct pronunciation, but in the US we use it, it's an acronym, DEI, and it stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So after the murder of George Floyd, particularly, a couple years ago, there was a huge push to what it did was it illustrated that America was not as far in advance in our areas of racial equity and equality and diversity as we thought, right? It sort of highlighted that. And so, what companies have been charged to do since then is to really put the mirror up and go, what do we need to do to help and make sure that our people feel they feel safe in our environment. They feel like they're all being treated the same. And we're giving everybody in our companies the right and equal and fair opportunities to grow and advance, right? And so usually, organizations will reach out to me to help facilitate that, to come up with
Mhm.
strategies and implementation and training and so forth. And that's what I do, right? In that space. So that's one way that I identify organizations, as usually they identify me, or I appeal to them because I know that there's a great and growing need, especially in a lot of industries within the public sector, as well as government, private sector, and so forth. But in addition to that, the work that I do, the philanthropic work that I do around immigration and statelessness is something that's just near and dear to me. This because that was my identity for most of my life. I was stateless, I was undocumented. So really, that's just something where it's not even a choice. It's just an intrinsic thing of who I am. It's my character, it's my value. So what I do is I mentor individuals. I'm part of an organization called United Stateless. What we do is we support other stateless individuals. We have a community where we provide resources, legal resources, educational resources, and we're trying to advocate for more legislation so that we can have a path to some sort of path to citizenship or path to permanent residency for stateless people, in the United States. So this is how I identify groups of individuals, really. And for the most part, people recognize my story and they reach out to me.
Excellent, amazing job. So if we go back, you already mentioned that you were a Black immigrant woman, once stateless, undocumented. You have somehow you had an experience like unforgettable, and if you can tell us like what has actually shaped your strong commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of somehow, people said, this is my purpose because of my life experience.
Yes.
This is probably the case for you, but you could have been done like different kind of things, but you decide to put all of your efforts in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Why?
Yeah. Well, because, true, I love that question. It is just my life calling. It's shown up in every area of my life. Um, you know, in addition to having been stateless and undocumented, I was also orphaned at a very young age, right? And so um, I was placed in communities and spaces where I really did understand what it's like to be part of a minority group, right? And not have access to things. And when I was exposed because of the identifiers that I had as a result of my circumstances, I saw how other people saw me. I saw how other people saw the groups that I was associated with. And I also feel like I had an epistemic sort of privilege, and I recognize the privilege that I had because of the way I sound. Sometimes people didn't associate me with those other groups, right? So um, I was able to navigate um, and not be seen. So what I mean by that is, um, one of the very first things I remember when I was placed in deportation proceedings was the administrator, Social Security administrator, because that's how I ended up, being placed in deportation proceedings. I went to adjust my Social Security status, and I was in college, and I was placed in removal proceedings. But the administrator said, "You don't sound like the rest of them." Right. So that was a very telling statement. I don't sound like the rest of them. What does that mean? Right. And there was a perception of what someone who is undocumented, who is a illegal alien at the time, that was the association, what they sound like, right? There's a certain perception that people have of individuals that belong to the different communities that I belong to, and they're not always good. There's stereotypes, there are tropes about Black people, about Black women, about immigrants. We look at the media, US media, the way that undocumented immigrants are portrayed. They're seen as subhuman, as a threat. Stateless people, most people don't even know what a stateless person is, although there are over 210,000 in the US, there are over 12 million in the world. The number keeps growing because people are being displaced, and statelessness is a result of discrimination. Oftentimes, people become stateless because there are rules and regulations and laws that are created to exclude certain groups of people from their own country, the countries they were born in, right? And so that alone, just those experiences and being able to toggle because of the privilege that I had of being non-threatening because the way I sound, sometimes because I was a woman versus a man, all of those things played a role. And so I was constantly, you cannot, I mean, when you have privilege, you have the choice of either acknowledging the privilege that you have and not feeling guilty, but asking yourself, well, what can I do, right, with this privilege to support others that don't have it? Or you can deny it because you feel like people are suggesting that because you have privilege, it means you've never suffered, which is not true, right? Privilege is not an eraser for suffering or pain, but sometimes people think that is. And so they deny it, and then they go, I'm not, it's not my problem to help other people. I'm going to help myself. But I acknowledge the privilege that I had, and also it's just my story. So that is what drove me to be who I am. And also because I've gone through the experience of not having a voice, of feeling downtrodden, of losing my dignity as a result of the circumstances that I was in. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to think that you're worthless, that you don't exist. I've actually I know what it's like to have I had an immigration judge telling me that I was a nobody and I deserved to be deported, right? So when you are reduced to nothing by another human being, right? Whether it's covertly and they say it, or it's, it's not so covert and but it's suggested through a microaggression, and that happens also, and you break down, it can affect your mental health. And you have a choice. You have two choices. You continue to break down until you're left with nothingness of you, or you find some way to build yourself up and then decide that you're not going to allow other people to go through this because it's not okay. And that's the choice that I made.
That's amazing, incredible, and probably it reminds me a little bit about the this book of Frank. What was the name?
Viktor Frankl?
Uh, Viktor Frankl. Like when he said, like, this can't determine like how I view everything that is happening. I'm going to put my mind onto a different kind of thing. I'm gonna, I mean, it's you against everything that's happened.
That's right.
So probably, how do you put it on a way for other people that is passing, that it's being on that moment, that feeling like under the water? What are the, I don't know, recommendations? What kind of thoughts do we need to have to overpass those kind of feelings and everything, you know?
That's great, Rodrigo. Great question. By the way, I love Man's Search for Meaning. So that's the book you're referring to, Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
I
Thank you.
remember reading it. I actually read it in the worst of times because I just to read something from someone who was going through something so abhorrent, something I couldn't even imagine, right? The Holocaust, and what he had to do mentally to survive that. I know there's a lot of controversy around that book and his, all of that, but I read it just with that lens particularly, and I really appreciated it. And what does it take, or what do I tell people, or what do I believe it takes? I'm very honest, and I say that it's not for me. I'm not going to sit there and go, oh, I found all this strength and I am this martyr. I'm going to be honest. I broke down many times. I mean, there were many instances where I had suicidal ideation. There were many instances where I felt very sorry for myself, where I did break down because I thought, why me? Why do I have to keep suffering? I've gone through this. I lost my mother. I lost my stepfather. I don't have a home. And now I really don't have a home. And now I don't have an identity. And, it just seemed like there was, for almost a period of almost 15 years, it just felt like life was really hard and it just got harder. And I would see the people around me, my friends, and they just looked so happy. Their lives looked so easy, and I just wanted an ounce of that. And I felt like, what did I do to deserve this? So I know that, there are many people right now today who are feeling that. And it's really important that I acknowledge that truth, that that was my experience as well. And I would just think about, and what, maybe life would be easier if I wasn't here. I mean, I went there. There were a lot of mental health challenges that I experienced as a result of just my journey. So it's important for me to be honest so that others who might be struggling don't feel like they don't feel less than because they don't automatically have this, this courage to make it. What it took was community. It took people who loved me, who, when I was down, they lifted me up. They literally buoyed me up, right? And sometimes that's what it takes. It takes one person. It takes two people. It takes calling someone when you feel so broken who says, no one's ever going to have the right words or anything, but sometimes when someone just, they're on the other line with you and they say, look, I don't know when this is going to end, but I have faith that it will. Or when they cry with you on the phone because they're so worried about you, but they don't know how to fix it. And that is the compassion that lifted me up every time. And there were lots of times that I felt, many more than I'd like to even
Mhm.
acknowledge, right? So that's what lifted me up in times when I could not find the light in myself. So that's one thing. I think the other is, I like to say that, like, a purposeful community, right? So meaning, when I started to really find agency was when I had people who could validate me or validate my experiences. So, not necessarily agree with me, but hear my voice. And that's when I realized, oh, wow, I actually do have a voice, because this
Mhm.
person is telling me what I just said. They're acknowledging that they heard me. And that was so powerful for me. Right. And for me, the other thing was access to information, education, however we want to couch it. And education shows up in so many different ways this way, these days. You can go on Google and find all the information you need.
Yes.
For me, it was being able to access school and going to university and studying these things about, you know, uh, immigration and the laws. That's what empowered me. Right. And I remember when I really started to understand immigration within the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion was in college, when I decided I was going to do a field study, with individuals in the local community, refugees who had
Mhm.
just been brought to the US or came to the US. And I was going to focus on Black Sudanese refugees and white Bosnian refugees. Both communities were Muslim, so that was consistent. Both were refugees in the local community. Both were they immigrated as a result of war, genocide. And I decided to do a comparative analysis to understand, how was their ability to assimilate in the US? How easy or difficult was it, based on race, based on perception, based on that? And that's really what opened my eyes around, wow, so much of our experiences has to do with people's perceptions of us. And whoa, that's so interesting, and it's so powerful, and it's so scary as well. And so that was education. So really,
Mhm.
education was one, community, and like I said, a very targeted community of being able to identify certain people who could buoy me up. Those are the ways that I was able to uplift myself, and having somebody, or acknowledging when someone validated me, was really, really critical in my healing journey. Right. And having just the resources to heal. So, the last thing I would say is certainly having um, a mental health practitioner was really important for me. And I think that for many, but for anyone who's going through any kind of pain, it is important to have someone who is a professional, right? Who can support you in that journey.
Totally amazing. And I was searching your name, and I kept to. I arrived to your TED talk, um, investing in human capital and the power of non-monetary kindness. Um, you said, because I watched the entire TED talk presentation that you gave, and I love when you said people don't just invest in ideas, they rather invest in people with ideas.
Yes.
Uh, Talking about your TED Talk presentation, could you share a personal experience that exemplifies the long-term rewards of such investments, particularly in the context of DEI initiatives?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many. I'll start with my own. I will say that, you know, that entire TED talk was really framed around this example, or this anecdote of, I had who's a person who's now a retired judge, and his wife in the local Charlottesville community invest in me, right? They decided to pay my way through private school, boarding school. And this was on the heels of my mother and stepfather dying, me becoming an orphan, being tossed from one, um, I would say, abusive or neglectful home to another, not knowing what my future was going to be, and then being introduced to this private school that I couldn't afford. That was like,
Mhm.
$27,000 a year. And this couple who knew nothing about me, except my potential, and heard about my potential, decided to invest in me. And it was a 2-year investment, but quite a bit of money. And they invested in me rather than helped me, because that relationship evolved, right? If it was a helping relationship, it would have been at a distance. Here's money for this little Black girl to go to school. That's it. And then, we're
Yeah.
helping this little Black girl. And that would be the conversation. And I'm sure everybody would tell them how amazing they were. And that's wonderful. But what they decided to do, and what I decided to do, was to let them see me as a person. Like, you're not investing in just this idea of me, or an idea. You're investing in me with my ideas. And this is who I am. And this is my journey. And I've known them for over 20 years at this point. I go to their house. Like, I am like family to this couple, who started off with, it was a check, right? But they decided this was not about just helping and giving charity, because that's easy to do. But this was about
Mhm.
investing. This was about them learning about themselves, that not just them giving to me, but me giving to them, right? They're enriched as a result of this long-standing relationship. By the way, that financial exchange happened many moons ago. In the last maybe 18 years, there hasn't been any financial exchange. It's just been a relationship that's evolved. So that's an example of, the investing beyond. And when we think about DEI, there's so many, in terms of diversity, there's so many categories of diversity that people don't know about: socioeconomic, race, religion, right? There are all these contexts that people don't necessarily understand. They automatically assume diversity means race and gender. So many other
Mhm.
categories, right? And so that was
Yes.
that's an example. But another quick example, because I know I can be very verbose, but
Okay.
when I work with organizations and they say, oh, maybe we're going to give money to this philanthropic organization. We're going to give money to this organization, a women's organization, and there we go, right? And what I say is, why don't you, like, for example, there was one company, they were an energy company, and I said, instead of just throwing money at organizations, because everybody does that and you have it, so you can, why don't you find an organization that's in line with your mission? It's much more thoughtful. It's much
Mhm.
more intentional. So
Mhm.
instead of just giving money to this and that organization, why don't you look for organizations that facilitate water, like clean water in the US or in the world, however you want to do it? And that's the organization that you partner with, that you can provide, financial support with. And not only that, right? Because that's just one layer or one dimension. Okay, you give
Yes.
money, great. But if you want to invest, that means, right, when you're looking for that next DEI speaker, that next, event, you're looking for something to do to acknowledge and celebrate DEI in your organization, instead of hiring, some big time speaker, why don't you get someone from that organization to come in and talk about the effects and impact of clean drinking
Mhm.
water, how it's impacting certain communities, how certain communities don't have access, and why. And then it's a full story. It's tied to your mission. It's very intentional. And there's an exchange, and those are learning on both ends. That's what investing looks like, right? Helping looks like,
Totally.
we're a big company, corporation. We're just going to give, 50,000 to this company. I mean, this nonprofit, and then we're done. So that's just another example.
That's great, Martin, because also you are teaching them and showing them like the right way to do things. I love that. Um, through your thought-provoking writing for publications like the Huffington Post, you have addressed immigration policy and the challenges faced by undocumented immigrant communities. As
Mm.
a social justice advocate, what are some of the key policy changes or societal shifts you believe are essential to create a more equitable and inclusive environment for marginalized individuals in today's world?
Yeah, that's a pretty big question, and and I'll say that, this is my little plug, but I wrote a book called, I guess it's yeah, there we go. It's blurry for some reason.
A manager's guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the new workplace?
Well, that's one book, but this is my first book. It's called Illegal Among Us. I don't know, for some
Oh,
reason, you can't,
a memoir.
yes, this is my memoir. It's called Illegal Among Us, A Stateless Woman's Quest for Citizenship. So there it is. There's the title. It's on Amazon. And this was a memoir. And this was before my book on, the ABCs of diversity, a manager's guide to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in my memoir, I do give some practical application on how I navigated through this immigration, how I navigated as a stateless person and an undocumented immigrant. And these are some just tools that others can apply and use. It doesn't mean, I mean, the system is designed so that it can't be prescriptive. No two people who have the same background, maybe, who have the same went through the same process, will have the same outcome when it comes to US immigration policy,
Oh,
unfortunately, because the policies are broken, right? The system is designed, it's inconsistent and it's incoherent. The, immigration courts, there's just like there's so many issues. And so when you ask the question of what needs to change, a lot of things need to change, right? We've got to, first, I think, at a very just basic level, immigration is this huge ecosystem. And when people say immigration, um, usually people don't know that there's so many different facets, right? The
mm,
stateless process and community is totally different from the undocumented community. And when you're undocumented, there's, a dreamer versus someone who qualifies for DACA looks different, versus an asylum seeker, versus, I mean, there's so many different layers to it, right? And there's in no way is anyone expected to understand everything, but at least have that lens when you're hearing, you're watching the news, you're hearing these stories, you're asking yourselves, well, yeah, it's immigration, but what does that mean? Who is the actual audience? Like, let me understand some more and find ways to ask questions or to explore and investigate. That's one. Two is, at the very end of the day, I don't take a political stance. I take a human stance. This is, and that's what I encourage people to think about. Like, that's the DEI part of this, right? When I am conducting any kind of training on diversity, on equity, or inclusion, what I encourage people to do is put yourself in the other person's shoes, or just try to imagine things as them, right? Of course, we can never walk in somebody's shoes, but we can try to pivot our own lens and understand what they're saying as if we were going through it. What would that feel like if I was
mm,
that person going through that? What does it take for somebody to flee their country? I mean, if I'm happy and I'm okay in my country and I'm okay in my home and I feel safe, I would want to stay. So what does it take for someone who to literally risk their entire life to
mm,
leave? What would it take? Right? What would it take? When I'm hearing about this person who's stateless and has been in the US all their life since they were 4 years old, and all these things happen, like, are they really? If I were in that situation, I guess all I'd be trying to do is just survive. I'm not would I be trying to hurt somebody? Or am I really just trying to survive? That's all it
Mm,
takes. That's the human component of it. And that's pivoting our lens. And that's what I encourage people to do in this space of DEI, in the space of immigration, whatever space, is just to try to consider things from somebody else's perspective. And it doesn't mean we agree. That's not the goal, to agree or disagree sometimes. Sometimes it's just to imagine what it would be like. What did it take? And so I like to keep it that simple because there are certain policy suggestions that I have. There's a lot of stuff that we can do to incentivize attorneys. We can look at, law schools and creating incentives so more lawyers can want to go into immigration. And even in the space of immigration, lawyers who specialize in removal cases it's a very concentrated group. Right now, they're overworked, they're oversaturated with cases. Judges, they're being given quotas on how many cases they have to get through in a
wow.
particular year, which forces them to move really quickly and make decisions in haste. There's so many other layers, policy, and economic layers to this that we could totally get into. But at the end of the day, it's a human condition.
Mm,
And that's what I think about. And I think the last thing I would say around this is that, you know, the people who are making decisions and policy decisions around immigration are not the people that have gone through it and have experienced it, right? So it occurs to me that perhaps having and including voices of individuals who have gone through the experience and have come out of it would lend itself well in finding solutions. That's all I'm
mm,
saying, right? So
yeah,
maybe having some sort of governing body of individuals like myself, not necessarily me, but who've gone through those experiences, whom policymakers can also reach out to understand. Let's come up with a strategy.
totally.
Let's figure this out by using the survivors as well to find
Yes.
solutions. So that is what I'm suggesting, and that's really, at the end of the day, that is the framework of DEI. It's about bringing everybody into the conversation to find better outcomes, to create more equity and fairness, bringing everyone in to solve the problem.
Totally, totally agree with you. Obtaining the information from the people that have experienced
Yeah.
that. Um, I don't know if the law specifically um, for people that is stateless is the same. Doesn't matter on what state they arrive to the US, or you have different kind of laws for these kind of people. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how it actually works.
Thank you for sharing, because most people don't, and no, most people wouldn't. Why would anyone understand? Because and that's why, the cover of my book shows it's like a shadow of a person behind a fence, because in the organization that I'm part of, United Stateless, one of our members says it beautifully. Great analogy. If being undocumented is like being in prison, being stateless is like being in solitary confinement. You're like a shadow amongst more shadows, but you're even further back. So most times, I will say that stateless people don't have any legal recourse. Stateless, the definition according to the United Nations of statelessness, is someone that does not have nationality anywhere, right? And that can happen for a myriad of reasons. So there are some countries where your citizenship is patrilineal. So it's based on your father, right? Even if you're born in the country, it doesn't make you a citizen. So there are plenty of people who are stateless as a result of having been born in a particular country, but their father is not a citizen of that country, so they're not acknowledged as a citizen.
Mm,
I talked about discriminatory purposes or discrimination that leads to statelessness, and a lot of times. So when we think about, there's certain ethnic groups that are not considered citizens of the countries that they were born in. And that's done to discriminate these groups, like the Moringa. There are groups, ethnic groups in DR Congo, where I'm from, that are not considered citizens. There's also the change in government, right? Displacement. So if a country no longer exists anymore, and we know many of those, like the former Yugoslavia. So if someone was born in Yugoslavia and Yugoslavia no longer exists, and they don't have another country where they're a citizen of, well, then they could potentially be stateless. There is, in the Dominican Republic, again, discriminatory purposes, there's a law that was enacted a few years back that said, hey, if you are of Haitian descent, but you were born in Dominican Republic, predating back to 1940 something, you're no longer considered a citizen. So that means if I was born in Dominican Republic, my mother and father were born in Dominican Republic, my great-grandparents, my great-great-great-grandparents, whatever, predating back to 1942, and prior to that, they were in Haiti, none of us would be considered Dominican. So then you weren't born in Haiti, you were born in Dominican Republic, but the Dominican Republic is saying you're not a citizen. Maybe you decide to come to the US to flee the turmoil and the policies, and you're not considered a US citizen either, and there isn't a path. Well, then you're in fact stateless, right? So there's so many different examples of how people can end up stateless. If you were born in the former USSR, there are all these different caveats, and it's a lot easier than we think for somebody to become stateless. I was stateless because I was born in Zambia. My mother and father from DR Congo, which was formerly Zaire. But Zaire changed its constitution, its country name, to DR Congo. So I was not considered a citizen, also because my parents, were born there, not me. Zambia, in their constitution, said by the time I was 18, I would have had to, establish my citizenship. I didn't know that. When I was 18, I was trying to figure out where I was going to sleep because I was, I didn't have home. So I didn't know that. I came to the US on a visitor's visa when I was 4 years old with my mother in the back of her passport. My mother, when she passed away, she was a permanent resident in the process of becoming a US citizen. My stepfather was born and raised in the US. So so it never came up, that the question of my status never came up when I was in my childhood. So anyway, the US didn't recognize me as a citizen. So all three countries didn't recognize me as a citizen. And that's how I became stateless. And stateless people just don't have, there are no laws created for them. So they don't have any legal recourse. They couldn't, if I went to an immigration lawyer when I was stateless, they would say, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do with you. We don't even know where they could deport you to. And that's pretty scary.
Yeah. Totally scary. Whoa, I'm like in shock of everything that I'm listening, Martine. You show us your memoir, but you also have a book that you launched, I believe, last year, The ABCs of Diversity.
Yes.
Can you tell us what people can expect of this book and why everyone should buy it?
Yes, this is a primer. It's a primer on understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the name, the ABCs of Diversity, seems like it's pretty provocative because diversity, equity, and inclusion is not simple, but it can be. So the point I'm making is that we overcomplicate these, this idea of diversity, of equity, and inclusion with jargon. Oh, I don't know what to call the person, or I want to be politically correct. So that ends up deterring people from actually learning and getting and doing and just doing the work to connect with others, right? And build those relationships and pivot their lens. And that's really what diversity is about. It's about being able to see things from somebody else's perspective and to learn and to ask questions and ask permission to ask questions. It's not about being politically correct. It's not about knowing, Rodrigo, how do I, what are your identifiers? I can't know. Even if I look at you, I don't know how you identify,
Mm.
how you want to be identified, how you identify yourself racially, ethnically, whatever, gender wise. I cannot assume that. So if I'm so caught up in, oh my gosh, I want to say the right thing and refer to Rodrigo in the right way, and then I'm so caught up in saying it the wrong way, I won't say anything. Rather, I can just ask you, Rodrigo,
Yeah.
how do you like to, what are your pronouns? How do you identify yourself? How would you like
Mm.
for me to be identified? And so that's why the ABCs is called that, because we get so caught up in the words, and sometimes words have less when we don't when we words have less meaning when we already assume what they mean, if that makes any sense. So that's part of it. It's really around allowing people to just connect. Two, the subtitle is A Manager's Guide to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the Workplace. So particularly in the workplace, when we think about who influences diversity in the workplace, there are two groups who really drive it. One is human resources, and two are managers. Managers hire people, they influence with their compensation, how much people are going to get paid, right? They help to negotiate that. Managers promote people and promote them into new positions, they influence that. And a person decides to stay or leave an organization mainly because if they have a great manager, they're going to stay. Even if they don't like the company, they have a great manager, they're going to stay. They hate their manager, they're more inclined to leave. And so managers have a really intrinsic role in helping to shape the makeup of an organization. They influence diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this book is a primer for them and human resources on how to understand and incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion in your everyday management practices, which we already do, but we don't really even realize it. So we can realize what we're doing and then we can enhance it. Then we can actually enhance the makeup of our organization. That's really what this book is about. And so it really is every chapter, each chapter is short, and there's an exercise that we offer to managers. I offer to managers to take back and apply to their team. So when I wrote it so that it felt like a training. It's meant to feel like a workshop, a live workshop. You read a certain
Excellent.
section, you take it, you apply
And
it.
the link is here. You can go to the web martinekalaw.com
That's right.
slash book, and you will find the book of Martine. Martine, I would like to speak a little bit about what do you do in Martine Kalaw Enterprises. Can you kindly provide a comprehensive explanation of Martine Kalaw Enterprises and your role within the organization?
Yes. So I am the founder and CEO of Martine Kalaw Enterprises. And what we do is we help to elevate organizations. We help to elevate the people in organizations so these organizations can grow and continue to be productive. So what does that mean? That means that especially in this time where, you know, we're experiencing recession and organizations are having to lay people off and downsize, there's a lot of skepticism that employees have of leadership. They're questioning a lot of things. They're questioning leaders' intention, whether their authenticity. They're questioning their security in being in that organization. And so what we do at Martine Kalaw Enterprises is that we provide organizations, leaders, and human resources with the tools, right, to support and elevate their people. So the people stay and they continue to believe in the leadership in the organization. And that's through DEI. That's one lens, one path. The other is through learning and development, right? So developing learning strategies to keep people engaged so that they see that there's a learning is a benefit, right? And so those are the two approaches that we use, and they work hand in hand. So we do that so that human resource professionals who are usually tagged or given the responsibility of dealing with change and keeping people engaged and figuring out DEI. And sometimes they don't have the bandwidth, the time, nor the energy and the knowledge. We do that for them. We help them. We help to equip them so that they have a seat at the table to make sure that the organization and its people are elevated.
Excellent. What would you say is the key factor that allows your enterprise to work with Fortune 500 companies?
Yes. What is the key factor? The key factor is it's if you really care about the people, you have to really care about your people, or at least see the value that your people have in driving your business. If as an organization you don't really care about the people, or you don't see that the people have any value, or you don't connect your outcomes, your revenue to the people that work there, then there's the work that then there's probably some work that the organization needs to do in appreciating and valuing and seeing the impact of people, because people are the thing that matters the most in an organization. And so we want to find ways to keep people satisfied, keep people motivated, keep people engaged, all of those things, right? And so that is a requirement for any organization to do this work successfully and have a successful outcome.
Besides you in the company, who else is in your team?
Yeah, I have about 5 people right now, and this is a growing team. So we've got 5 or 6, actually 6 people, because we have someone on the back end tech. We've got some, an office manager, a virtual assistant. A lot of my team is virtual. And then we've got some trainers and project managers who are helping to facilitate the relationships that we have with these different companies. I try to be the face of this, but sometimes you need some other resources. And at 9 months pregnant, as of this week,
Wow,
certainly having help and having some support is very important.
congrats on that.
Thank you.
So, if someone wants to hire the services of Martine Kalaw Enterprises,
Yes.
what are the steps that this company must do?
What are the steps that this organization they just go on my website, martinekalaw.com, and they can schedule a free consultation. We also have master classes once a quarter. So a master class is a 1-hour live session facilitated by me, where I address and provide the 5 steps that any organization can take in the next 90 days to drive DEI or drive learning. So that's one way, is just join a master class, sign up for one, attend, and learn more. 2, another option is just to schedule a free consultation with me by going to my website. Both masterclass and consultation are on my website. And when we conduct a consultation, my job is to conduct a needs analysis to really understand, what are your needs? What do you think your needs are? And typically what I'll ask is, who else in the organization can I talk to just verify that, because one person's perception of needs might look different from the others, right? So identifying those needs, also identifying who's the decision maker, right? And whether we're going to work together or not. And then I do my own assessment of everything we talked about, because usually what clients tell me is the surface, like the band-aid issue. So we've got to go another layer down to truly understand what is the underlying, um, need, or what is the underlying issues or issue that we need to address, right? We unpack it. And then from there, we can then provide a proposal on whether sometimes it's strategy and implementation that's required. Sometimes it's training. Sometimes training is part of the strategy and implementation. And then sometimes it looks like a myriad of things, a combination of different solutions.
Cool. So, in terms of a strategy, imagine that a company needs to implement the what was the
Yeah,
acronym?
diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. Yes.
Um, what is the length of like how long does it take to implement that
It
inside the
varies.
company?
Great question. It varies from one organization to another. It depends on the need. It depends on the resources an organization already has. It depends on their budget. It depends on a number of things. And we work with organizations globally, right? Because this conversation around diversity, of equity, of inclusion is worldwide, and it looks different. The makeup of it and how we define things looks different one country to another. Um, but it is, whenever you in any group or any society, there's usually a group that is considered the majority, and then there's usually a group or groups that are not the majority. And so there are perceptions and associations and certain treatment that the group that is a majority experiences versus the minority, right? And so when you think about that, because I've had people go, oh, in my country we don't have any issues of diversity. We don't have any issues. I go, oh, really? Well, actually, I've been to your country and I've had this experience. So it wasn't right. So that's it. But to answer your question, beyond that, it's going to look, that's where we conduct the needs analysis. And in my proposal is where I will give you an idea of how long it could take, right? And it also depends on your parameters. You might say, hey, this is something we need by this time frame. But when you want to do the work, the strategy work, and you want to do it well and effective, it's not something that happens overnight. And we have to be patient with the process. It doesn't mean that you have to work with Martine Kalaw Enterprises forever. But what it means is that we can provide you with the implementation strategy, right? And walk you through it and guide you and identify the resources within your team or teams that you can use. But in addition to that, part of the strategy is acknowledging that it happens in phases and accepting that, right? Because when you think about all of the different layers that have led to the challenges that we have as a society with equity, fairness, took years, hundreds of years, even in some parts of the world, including the US, decades. So, how can we expect something that has been a result of years and decades and centuries of being made to be undone and fixed within a year, within
Hmm.
6 months, within 2 days? That's just not, it's just illogical, right? And so that's one of the things I try to get my clients to also understand, that if we do this right, it's going to be in phases. And DEI is a business imperative. It's like when you're creating a marketing strategy, a branding strategy, when you have a tech strategy, does anyone expect someone to come in,
Hmm.
like the head of engineering, to come in and fix everything around engineering in 6 days? No,
Yeah.
right? They have a strategy, they have an implementation plan, and they have ways to measure success. That's it. DEI is a business imperative. So if we really want to see it as part of a business, it's really about um, being able to, present it as such. And, one of the things I also mentioned that is really critical is that there is a revenue component. When you do DEI right, there is an impact to the business. financial impact. And there should be, we should be measuring that. That's
Hmm.
really, really important.
Totally important for people in finance that most of the times are the ones that sign the check, you know?
Yeah. It's important for
So,
everyone because if you're a business to consumer, um, when you tap into new markets, right? That's more clients. That's more revenue. That's how I like to define the impact of DEI, how it affects the return on investment. So you want to be able to do that upfront, right? When you are working with a consultant to figure out what is the impact, right? It's not just the right thing to do, the nice thing to do. Oh, it's an extracurricular. It's about my people and making sure my people are happy. It's, well, how are we going to measure that? How are we going to know that it has an impact, a positive impact to our business? Well, let's look at it. And there's a way to tie DEI to the business, the financial gains all the time, all the time.
yes. What would you say to a person that has already read your book? Can that person actually implement DEI, or he must hire you as well to implement it?
Well, one, you never have to hire me. You can hire someone else. You can bring in a DEI expert, another DEI expert, thought leader. You can leverage the resources that you have within your organization. And certainly, my book is a primer. So, yes, as human resources or manager, it gives you the tools, the fundamental tools to navigate and create a more inclusive culture in the workplace, a more equitable culture. Now, that's different, right? That's one layer of strategy. The strategy looks like the whole thing. How are we going to drive the numbers, right? Our revenue. How are we going to scale this? So we start doing this. How are we going to make sure it happens every year? Who's going to manage all of this, right? How do we make sure that the pipeline of hiring is much more inclusive? What strategies can we use, right? Those are all things that you can't necessarily just get in a book, right? Those are things that require having expertise, right? Just like, again, I'll give you a perfect example. You know, it's like the difference between buying a book on being a good salesperson versus bringing in a chief sales officer, right? And having the book. So
Yeah.
the chief sales officer is there to drive the vision and being able to measure it and scale it and all of those things. The book gives you tools that you can use on an everyday basis. And so they complement each other. So at the end of the day, this book is something that should be used and can be used at any point. But if you do it the right way and you're actually doing, leveraging the tools and the tools in the book, it will highlight that, hey, we need a bigger strategy. We need a way to implement this on a larger scale beyond just our managers in the workplace. And so who's doing that? How do we do it? And that doesn't, I would love to be partnered with many organizations, but sometimes it's not me. Sometimes there's someone within your organization that can do this, right? But they have to have a
Yes.
background in DEI. They have to be an expert. They have to have that expertise. And so, that's the important part of it.
And who would you say is your perfect client? That does that company needs to be a huge company, a 500 fortune company?
Not
Uh,
necessarily. Yeah. No, like I said in the beginning, my clientele ranges. That's why my clientele has been, a tech company, a global tech company that has offices in, you know, Bulgaria, Romania, you know what I mean? Like, Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the United States and Canada. That's one. To a commercial real estate company that's based in Texas and New York, to a sales company, a private aviation company. I mean, it runs the gamut. A luxury retail company that has offices in like the Middle East and South America and all that. So the ideal client is one that is willing to be honest about where they want to go, where they are with their DEI journey, where they want to go, or build out their learning and development strategy, or learning and development culture, because they see the value of learning and they see the value of DEI. That's what, that's an ideal client. Ideal client is a client who is going through significant change in their organization, and they don't know how to keep their people excited and engaged,
Mhm.
right? There is morale is down. They don't know what to do, right? Because they just maybe laid off 500 people, but then they're telling the rest of their employees, like, we need you to be happy and excited and to trust us. Well, why would the remaining employees want to trust a group of leaders that terminated 500 people? So that's it.
Yes.
But at the very end of the day, the one consistent thing is the organization has to not be performative. This can't just be about, hey, we're just doing this so that we can check off the box and look like we did something. No, we really, really care and understand that
Yes.
our people is what drives this business. And so we need to do whatever we need to do to keep our people engaged. Whatever people we have left, what do we need to do? And so that's really the common denominator across any and all organizations that I enjoy working with. That would be an ideal client.
Excellent. Is there anything else about Martine Kalaw Enterprise that you would like to mention, but I didn't ask you?
You asked some very great and thorough questions. So I cannot say. I think the only thing is that we also do a lot of speaking engagements. So that's something that I have done in the past, and I do. So keynote talks and so forth, and some coaching. So some of the things that, sometimes it's coaching senior leadership or the CEO on how to navigate the language around DEI, how to get and create a learning culture within your organization. So what does leadership need to do? What do they need to say? How do they say it? If someone said the wrong thing in leadership and they're like, oh, now what do I do? Because I'm worried about the publicity around it. So that's what we do as well, as we support and coach those leaders. So we want to give leadership and organizations agency to elevate their people, right? We want them to get the credit at the end of the day and to elevate their people so that their business continues to be productive. So that's a way to kind of summarize the other features of Martine Kalaw Enterprises.
Excellent. Martine, do you have 5 more minutes? Because we are
Yes.
just ending the show. Okay. So the next, where is it? Here is, I have something called trigger questions.
Oh, okay.
So the idea here is short answers.
Short
Okay.
answers. Okay.
So I have 5 questions for you. And the first one is, can you tell us, Martine, something that no one knows about you?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I think I did. I just told you a few minutes ago that I turned 9 months pregnant today, this week. So this week is Monday. So yes, that is something that no one knew.
Okay, okay. Number 2, Martine, what do you want to accomplish in life?
Oh, wow. I would like to, I want to be remembered or known as someone who built bridges and connected communities and lifted people up.
Excellent. Number 3, what has been your biggest mistake made to date?
Mm. My biggest mistake has been doubting myself, and the times where I said no to opportunities because I doubted my ability to do it, like a speaking engagement. I was like, I'm not ready. And then,
Hmm.
it turns out I could have done it. It's A lot of it is a mind shift. So,
Yes, totally. Number 4, what person from the business world do you admire and why?
Excellent question. I admire Verna Myers. She was the chief, I think it's chief diversity or inclusion officer at Netflix. Prior to that, she has her own consulting company. She's been at Netflix for about 5 years, and then I think there's news came out about 2 weeks ago that she's leaving to go back to her business and really make it about the experience is to support organizations to um, create more inclusivity and love. And I love that language that she uses around her mission.
Nice. And the
Mhm.
last one, when you are no longer on this earth,
Mm.
how would you like to be remembered?
Mm. I think that was kind of like my question number two or three, but I want people to remember me as someone who lived with no regrets, took every opportunity to live life and not have any regrets, took chances, maybe failed, but did it anyway. That's how I want to be remembered.
Love it. Love it. And the last thing that we ask everyone in this show, the bonus track that we have, bonus track recommendations about books, movies, series, podcasts, anything that you would like to our community to take a look at.
Oh, okay. Gosh, there's so many things. I guess I would say one of I any books on social psychology I love because at the very core of what I do, it's about social psychology. And one of my favorite books is by Philip Zimbardo. It's called The Lucifer Effect. It is like 500 pages long.
Oh,
So read it. It might take you 2 years, but it's very, very good. And there are all these different case studies of experiences and stories around the world, particularly wars, where you're able to understand the psychology of communities and how these things happened. And so I love that book. Start there.
interesting.
It's really good. It's really, really good.
What else? What else can you tell us?
I can tell you a lot of things, but in terms of television or Netflix, I just tuned into the Black Mirror. It's a really great show. Also, I think it came out 3 years ago, but it
Yes.
sort of kind of gives you an insight of where we're going with our society, and it's pretty scary because I watched an episode. Apparently, this aired like 3 years ago. It's on AI. I mean, it wasn't called AI 3 years ago, but it's pretty creepy how accurate it is. So I think that's really great. Um, and I would say I watch a lot of YouTube. YouTube University is like a I call it YouTube University. But I like oh my gosh, what's his name? He used to be a monk, but now I forgot. Jay
Robin,
Shetty. Jay
oh,
Shetty.
oh,
Jay Shetty is phenomenal. So, I think the terminology that was overused a few years ago was on mindfulness. But Jay Shetty was a monk, I think, and he not I think he was, and then he decided to come out of that. But he does a lot of work on personal fulfillment, reflection, all of those things. And he has this podcast show. It's on YouTube, and where he
nice.
talks to celebrities and non-celebrities just about their journey, experiences, and reflection. It's very soulful. It's very spiritual, and it's just good spiritual food. So I encourage everybody to tune in to just go on YouTube, type in Jay Shetty, and it's a bunch of great episodes will pop up.
Awesome. I will take a look. And your
And
favorite movie?
audiobooks. Um, my favorite movie, gosh, this is a hard one because I love a lot of movies. So it's kind of hard for me to think of I don't have a favorite. I um like The Rain Man. It's a really, really old movie, but I love The Rain Man. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, seen it, whatever. I love that movie. Um, what's another one that I like? I love Inception. I mean, there's so many great movies out there. The Talented Mr. Ripley is one of my ultimate favorite movies. I think it's underrated. It's with Matt Damon. It's so good. It's like a psychological thriller. So I love that, and I also love Capote. So
Oh,
again, I'm always any movies that are sort of tied to like the psychology of how people think
mm,
and having to understand people that you would have a certain perception of, but then you kind of go try to go into their mind. It's like, whoa, it's totally different. So Capote is another. I think it's called In Cold Blood or something. It was like he wrote a book about it, then they turned it into a movie. But it's about Truman Capote and the work that he did when he interviewed these two people that committed a murder. So it's kind of like a thriller. It's really, really good. I like that too. And lastly,
nice, nice.
I'm a big
Which
Russian
one?
literature book like fan. I love all Russian literature. So, you know, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, love, love, love Russian literature because it's all like it's like crime, psychology of people, how they think, the development of characters. It's so good. It's like a soap opera that never a telenovela, but it's like this long, long one. So I love it.
Amazing, amazing. And Martina, as I don't know if you know, but the last thing that we ask everyone in this show is that if you somehow need to share a message to humankind, what would you say them? And here the idea is that I will put you on first screen whenever you're ready in three, two, one.
So if I were going to send a message to humankind, it's to be kind, to be kind is to listen, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and to validate them. And that just means hearing them, listening to them, acknowledging what they're saying and not focusing whether too much on whether you agree or disagree, but just acknowledging them just for sharing and for sharing their truth. That's what we need to do and what we can do as human beings. And it doesn't cost anything.
Totally agree, Martine. It has been a real pleasure
Thank you.
knowing your life, getting to know you better, um,
Thank
all
you.
the work that you're doing. It's just mind blowing. Uh, sometimes you don't know about these things. So I'm
Right.
very glad that you came to the show to tell us what is happening and why you actually are doing this. I, well, like to you, like all the success. I
Thank
get
you.
out of words, but I love your story and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Rodrigo. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
All right, we are out. We are ending transmissions. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day, people.